All right, let's begin. Hello, everyone online. Welcome to virtual Delft. So it's our first attempt at this hybrid format. So do write in chat if you have how it goes for you. But with that out of the way, I'm happy to introduce Andriani from Sorbonne, who is going to tell us about the driven Andreev molecule.
Thanks. So thanks for being here in the flesh and via Zoom. I'm going to talk about our preprint called Driven Andreev Molecule, which is work I am doing during my PhD with Benoît Douçot in Sorbonne. And then the last slides will be a bit of unpublished work we are writing up, which is a bit of a follow-up. Okay, so probably most of you are already familiar with this. In normal superconducting interface, the basic physics depends on the Andreev reflection. So an electron in the normal region will be scattered back as a whole, and this will lead to a Cooper pair being transmitted into the superconductor. And now if we have an SNS junction, the successive Andreev reflections between the superconductors will lead to a formation of the Andreev bound states. And these are basically what carry the DC Josephson current. And they are, so we have this formation of the two states, and it is a bit like a qubit. Well, it is a qubit, and so people are naturally interested in making, in realizing this for quantum information purposes, let's say. And so this gives a bit of motivation to couple two qubits. So we have the idea of an Andreev molecule where you would have two junctions that are close together. So this kind of setup where they share a common superconductor. And if the distance between the junctions is of the order of the superconducting length, you would have hybridization of the Andreev bound states on this junction. And this would lead to a non-local Josephson effect. So you would vary the phase across one junction and control the Josephson current on the other. And on the level of the spectrum, what you get is this kind of figure I show here is you would get some avoided crossings in the spectrum. So here I plot the gray lines are when the junctions are far apart, so 5 times the superconducting coherence. And what we see is that one of them is basically unaffected by the phase change, so it's completely decoupled. And the other just shows the typical Andreev bound state dispersion. And now then when I plot when I bring them close together, so they are the distance of the order of the superconducting coherence length, this is the blue lines, I get some avoided crossings, which is a sign that there is a coupling. Okay, so all this is in the equilibrium case, so I only have phase biasing. But here we will be interested in setups where we have out of equilibrium, so voltage biasing in our case. And as you know, when we have a voltage biased junction, we have the AC Josephson effect, because the phase evolves with time, and so we have an AC supercurrent, but we also have a dissipative DC quasi-particle current, which is kind of the plot on the right, and this is caused by multiple Andreev reflections. because now a quasi-particle can be reflected multiple times between the superconductors, and every time it is reflected, it kind of gains energy because of the potential difference. So at some point, you'll have enough energy to like overcome the superconducting gap, and then it will give a contribution to the DC currents. And so this kind of gives this subharmonic gap structure to this DC current, where you have sudden jumps whenever a new MAR trajectory becomes possible. So this is typically when you have subdivisions, integer subdivisions of the gap. So one of the questions one could ask is, okay, we have voltage biased system. What happens to the discrete levels we had before? What happens to the Andreev bound states at voltage, at finite voltage? So this is work that has been done before by my supervisor and collaborators. And what they basically find is that you still have a notion, like you still have something left of the Andreev bound states, only now you have resonances that are copied because the system is time periodic, so it's described by Floquet physics. And so you would have some resonances which will then be copied, so what I call the ladder of resonances. And these resonances have a finite lifetime because the multiple under reflections give a way to connect the once discrete levels to the superconducting continuum. So that would give finite, like some dissipation to the system. And yeah, so I have a plot here to show like a typical behavior. This is like a Van-Stark ladder for motion in electric field, for example, in a periodic potential. And so I should say that this kind of understanding holds when we have junctions with dots, okay? And it could hold also for multi-terminal superconducting dots, as long as we have commensurate voltages, so that there is time periodicity in the system. And so this is my basic setup. I want to study the driven Andreev molecule. So I choose this quartet configuration with plus minus V because it's the simplest way to get one basic frequency in the system, so Floquet physics. And I want to see, okay, what happens to the spectrum, what happens to the DC current, which we know for one junction, but has not been studied for the molecule. And the main message is that I find there are two different regimes. One of them is a molecular regime that, as in equilibrium, you have some hybridization, so you would have some splittings, avoided crossings, and all that stuff. And then there is a regime which does not exist in equilibrium, but is induced by the driving. And this regime of long separation of the dots actually is some new physics. So maybe questions or continues?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In the previous slide, you showed like the resonances. So yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Why aren't they symmetric around zero?
So it kind of depends on the setup I choose. Like if the junction is if they have symmetric couplings, then it's symmetric around 0, for example. But if I choose so this one I think is asymmetric because I chose a configuration where I have one junction and it's biased with -V and 0. So it's like 1/2 of the Andreev molecule, and this kind of asymmetry translates in the spectrum. But if I had -V plus V, so like a symmetric junction, then I would have symmetry around 0. Yeah, so the program is that I will briefly show some equations to show you the model and the method we use, and then show you some nice plots. So just so we can have an idea what I'm talking about, I have these 3 superconductors. I describe them with BCS Hamiltonians, and then I have the 2 quantum dots that are tunnel coupled to the superconductors, which is this V of t part here. It's just tunnel coupling. And as I said, with this voltage configuration, I have one basic frequency and time periodic Hamiltonian. And the idea is that I will use the time periodicity plus the idea that we still have a notion of quasi-particles in the system. So I will introduce some quasi-particle operator that is a solution of the Bogoliubov-de equation. And this quasi-particle operator kind of describes the amplitudes, the electron hole amplitudes on the dots and the electron hole amplitudes in the superconductors. And yeah, this the main idea is you Fourier expand all of these amplitudes into Fourier expansion, and you plug it into your Bogoliubov equation. And yeah, okay. Maybe I should have put it. Yeah, anyway, and what you get is you will end up with some eigenvalue equations, okay, for the amplitudes on the dots. So this U and V describe the amplitudes on the dots, and we'll integrate out the superconducting reservoirs, and so we sum over the energies and momentum, etc. That gives us these Green's functions. And basically what we've done here is that we have traded time for a position on a fictional chain. And now we can collect things nicely into,
What are the superscripts? Are these the contour ordered Green's functions, or what are 1, 1, 1?
The G.
The G.
Yeah, so the structure is J is just which superconductor it is. And then we have Green's functions that are kind of local, so that they are directly like local Andreev reflections, let's say. And then we have a non-local Green's function, which is the one that contains the coupling between the 2 dots. It kind of has the information that you have some non-local Andreev reflection through the middle superconductor.
Oh.
And the M's are the Floquet chain position. So so if I collect things in these matrices, but basically, so psi m here is an Ambu spinor for the electron hole amplitudes on the dots, and the M plus minus are kind of like hopping matrices on the tight binding chain. So they contain the local Andreev reflections by which you gain or lose the quantum of energy. And the M0 matrix will contain this non-local coupling through the middle superconductor. Okay. And the nice thing about a tight binding chain is that it gives us this tridiagonal block structure, and once you put a cutoff somewhere, you can then iterate and get an effective Hamiltonian. This is something that I think is very common in when you do Floquet engineering. So it's very similar, but the nice thing is that in the end you get some just recursive relations which are easy to calculate well numerically. So any questions about the method? Yeah, maybe I should say that.
Sorry, I actually do have a question. So you're considering a many body. So you are considering the Fermi C response. So how do you specify which states are going to be occupied and which ones not?
Yeah, actually, we don't have a description for the Floquet populations, which is something I would like to do afterwards.
All right. Okay.
But I'm thinking more of the open quantum system description, like with the density matrix. But up to now, we don't have it. We just have, eigenenergies. Yeah. So in the end, I can calculate some time-averaged spectral function on the dots. So here, first, I'm showing the results for a single junction. So I get a Green's function for the dots. And then what I plot here is I use this inverse scaling 1/, the voltage, because this gives me the period, basically. And the red lines are the like the maxima of the spectral function. And to get an idea of what this looks like, I make some cuts. So the blue cut, for example, would correspond to this figure here. So we get some families of peaks that are repeated. And if I increase the drive, the lifetime is the width is enlarged because I'm more hybridized with the lead, so I get some larger peaks. Okay. So now I do the same for the Andreev molecule. So if I am at at a distance which is of very superconducting length, I get, instead of 2 peaks, I get 4. So I don't know if you can see. So these 4, and these 4 get repeated up and down the ladder. So this is really a sign of coupling, as is very analogous to the equilibrium case. Okay, and this splitting of the levels will decrease exponentially with the distance, so that when I'm at 5 C naughts, I recover the single junction spectrum. Okay. And now I calculate the subgap current as well. And the main message is that if I look at the molecular regime, what happens is that the Mars steps will split into 4 substeps. So the splitting of the spectra also like translates into the splitting of the Mars steps. And if I increase the distance, I start to recover the single junction curve. Yeah, so here I show also like it seems to be more visible if I have smaller tunnel couplings, of course, that the resonances are more narrow. Okay, so now I increase the distance, and well, one might expect to just find, you know, two decoupled junctions, but actually, what I get is I look at the here. I make a zoom in one of the Mars steps, and I see that once I increase the distance, I get some oscillations of the IV curve itself. So it's the system is like an interferometer now, because you can change the current by changing the voltage. And the same like kind of oscillations happen in the density of states above the gap, which I plot here on the right. And I can find the phase factor that is responsible for these oscillations has this kind of dependence, and this is reminiscent of kind of forgotten effect called the Thomas effect, which I will talk about a bit later. And okay, I'm not the first one to say this. I should say is there's this previous paper that talks of this Floquet version of the Thomas effect. And so, just in case you don't know what it is, it's an experiment done in the 60s by Thomas. He took a thick film of superconductor, and he measured the tunneling currents on the density of states above the gap, and he sees these oscillations, which he calls geometrical resonances. And then 1 year later, McNulty and Anderson explained this effect is due to quasi-particle interference because of the non-uniform superconducting order parameter. And they, you know, that they say they find that the oscillations are a function of the thickness of the film and of the energy. And in the Thomas experiment, this correlation, or let's say this effect is he used the distance would be like 2 orders of magnitude bigger than superconductor here. So that's the kind of order of magnitude we also expect. Yeah. So now I look also at the subgap resonances. Before I was looking at the above the gap. And so on the left, I have the single junction. I plot the density of states, and below in the complex planes are the pulse of the function, let's say, in black. And now, so I take kind of a large voltage, so I can focus on these two resonances. And now I look at 50 psi 0, just for illustration. And what I see is that I still have the same resonances, but then I have superimposed oscillations on them. And it's quite funny because I actually were studying the poles first, and we saw this like proliferation of poles. We didn't really know what was going on. But then it turns out that in the density of states, all these poles just translate as oscillations. And now I have like kind of simple mechanism to explain these oscillations. The basic mechanism is that we have local multiple angular reflection on each dot, and after some reflections, the quasi-particle reaches the superconducting continuum of the middle superconductor, and then it can propagate without being bound by the superconductor here as well. Okay, so this is why you get a much larger order of magnitude for the distances. And so you will have two kinds of processes. Either you absorb photons, so this the left picture, or you emit virtual photons, the right picture, and both of these processes can contribute depending on the voltage, let's say. And well, I'm trying to do some analytics, so I take a large voltage approximation because then I can keep very few processes. So here with this, if omega 0 is larger than half of the gap, then I can only keep these two processes, two reflections I show here. Makes things easier for the equations, and I can actually, in the end, derive a kind of simple model to describe these resonances. The basic view is that we have two resonances, and they are coupled through a continuum of states. And the coupling is all hidden in these sigma plus minus self-energy matrices, which are exactly the processes I showed in the previous slide. So these self-energy matrices, they give some dissipation in the system. So the initial discrete level becomes a resonance, but they also provide a coupling through the continuum. Yeah, this kind of simple Hamiltonian, well, simple, maybe I shouldn't say simple, but everything here is kind of energy and voltage dependent. But this will in the end explains this behavior of the pulse. So here, for example, I increase the distance and I get this behavior of pulse that start to appear. So the oscillations start to appear. Yeah. So the main message I want to give is, yeah, once we turn on the voltage, we have this ladder of resonances. We have a molecular regime where the Floquet spectrum exhibits avoided crossings, and the subgap current also has its substeps here. But then when we look at a larger dot separation, we have a new regime where the driving provides a new method, a new mechanism for coupling that we cannot have at equilibrium. And yeah, the basic physics is that of two resonances coupled through a continuum of state. Yeah, and I want to leave you with some, well, there are a lot of open questions, but maybe what I want to do next, for example, is go back to the single junction and think about Floquet Andreev qubit. So if we have this kind of spectra and we add like a second drive, we could drive transitions between the ladders. And yeah, it would be interesting to see what we can do with that. and then also answer questions. If we have maybe a little description, maybe or a density matrix description, say we could answer questions about populations, also interactions we didn't treat at all. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Are there any questions? I would actually like to begin then. So you had the DC supercurrent. Can you explain a bit more what goes into that quantity? What exactly is the DC supercurrent?
In the first slides, right?
No, in the Floquet regime. So in the DC current. Okay.
This one.
Yeah. But so this one I thought takes into account the Fermi population.
Okay, yeah. Actually, when you calculate the current, you have to take into account the population, so the reservoirs. Yeah, that is true.
But now you have a 3-terminal device. So there's in principle at least 2 inequivalent currents that are flowing. Which one did you consider?
Okay, so here I calculate one of the like the current from dot 1 to superconductor 2.
So to one of the leads.
Yeah, like from dot 1 to C, for example. Yeah, concretely that's what I calculate.
But now, okay, that's but there's also in principle a phase offset that is possible between the 2 side superconductors, right? And if I understand correctly, the current that flows will depend on this phase offset. So
yeah, to be honest, I didn't at all like study the phases. Like I have them here. Of course, they will have an effect, but it's not what I focused on. But you're saying like that one of the currents will be different.
So both currents will be so if the 2 quantum if the 2 dots are coupled, then so because of the
depend on the phase.
Yes, indeed. So there's an extra degree of freedom that does not change the periodicity of the system, but changes the spectral function. And so there is a there's a finite bias supercurrent associated with that phase. I think that's actually
it's a supercurrent though.
Yeah. Well, it's still DC.
It is the multiplet.
Yeah, that's correct.
The quartet.
Yeah, that's the quartet's current.
No, it's true. So you have this contribution, but here I didn't because actually there's this Agis Melin, the paper on the side, he focuses on that, and there's a lot of previous work on the quartet current, so I didn't want to go into that too much.
And so perhaps another question more on the practical side. In your system, you did not consider the dissipation of levels above the superconductor, like the loss of quasi-particles above the superconducting gap.
Well, so I mean, in a sense, there is dissipation. If one looks at the at our Green's function, once you are above the gap, you have a imaginary contribution. So that's I don't know if that's the question actually.
No, so it's imaginary contribution due to what?
I mean, like if one looks at the density of states above
the
gap, you have this decrease because you have.
So there's a finite density of state. Okay.
That's what you mean.
No, I think I understand. So you do introduce the density of states above the gap, and you have the quasi-particle loss due to the
everything is included in the Green's functions of the superconductors. There's nothing else. So yeah, the Green's function is real inside the gap, and it's imaginary outside. So.
I have a slightly related question. So you have this simple model where you have these two states coupled by a continuum. And I'm wondering, since I guess you can make this continuum large, I'm wondering now if this continuum also has some maybe fixed coherence length or like dephasing length.
You mean like mesoscopic?
Yeah. So like what? Well, let's say.
Or like
if,
disorder?
Yeah, like disorder or something. So if the things dephase when you reach the other.
Yeah, then you wouldn't have the.
So you wouldn't have the oscillations, or it would just be the single particle regime in this case, as you shown.
I mean, I think these oscillations really depend on the fact that you have, pure.
Yeah, so it's a coherence.
Yeah,
it's a coherence effect.
Yeah,
okay.
so
I see.
as you introduce some dephasing.
So it would be just a single junction. You see the single junction result if it just decoheres.
Yeah. You would decouple.
Okay.
That's my.
All right.
So in that case, it is correct to say that this kind of phenomenon would be more likely to be observed in proximity systems where there is the very large superconducting gap with a big quasi-particle density and where things are lost, but there's also a small semiconductor where you can actually get a single propagating ballistic mode. Is that the right platform?
Actually, I don't think too much about the actual platform, but yeah, maybe. I think yes.
Can both regimes be there at the same time? Like, is there a length where?
No, I think because the molecular regime is much larger like it's first order coupling, let's say.
Right.
Because the molecular regime kind of depends on this coupling via this Green function, which would be first order in the tunnel couplings. But the process I showed for the Floquet-Thomas regime, they depend on the multiple angular reflections. So the simplest case I showed was third order so would have third order in the tunnel couplings because it involves 3 angular reflections.
So I'm wondering if you have charging energy for your middle superconductivity, does it help or does it suppress this coupling or the effects you study?
Charge energy where in the middle superconductor?
Yeah. Or is it becoming a completely different system we are looking at?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. I'm not so familiar with
No problem.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything secret, so I'll just not answer.
No problem.
All right, I see no further questions. All right, well then everyone, let's thank Andriani again. Yeah. All right. See you, everyone.